You walk into a store and the price tag on the item you want is wrong. Not wrong as in a sale, wrong as in 20% more than it was 6 months ago. You check another store. Same thing. You look online. Same thing. You start doing the math. Groceries up, clothing up, electronics up, your car payment up. Your paycheck? Mostly flat. What just happened? Answer: a trade war. Not a small one. The largest restructuring of global trade in a century. And right now, in 2026, it is quietly doing more damage to your purchasing power than you may realize. Let me explain what's really happening, and why it's more complicated and more important than any headline is telling you. The tariff revolution, how we got here. From January to April 2025, President Trump enacted the most sweeping tariff regime in American history. The average U.S. tariff rate jumped from 2.5%, where it had been for decades, to an estimated 27%, the highest level in over a century. Tariffs on China hit 145% at their peak. Steel and aluminum, 50%. Cars, 25%. Then more cars, semiconductors, copper, lumber, pharmaceuticals, all targeted. The stated goal: bring manufacturing back to America, reduce trade deficits, force trading partners to negotiate, and fund domestic tax cuts. The reality: prices went up, supply chains scrambled, and the world reacted. Canada and Mexico, America's two largest trading partners and USMCA partners, faced 25% tariffs. The EU struck a deal in Scotland, then watched it wobble. South Korea got hit with new tariffs after a deal was supposed to be done. Japan, India, Vietnam, all in the crosshairs of new Section 301 investigations. Then, on February 20th, 2026, something extraordinary happened. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled 6-3 that Trump's sweeping IEEPA tariffs, the ones imposed under emergency economic powers, were unconstitutional. The court said the president simply doesn't have the legal authority to impose tariffs unilaterally, at that scale, under that law. The government had collected $166 billion from more than 330,000 businesses under tariffs the Supreme Court just declared illegal. Refunds are now being processed, though slowly. Trump's response? He immediately replaced them with new tariffs under different legal authority, a 10% universal tariff on virtually all imports, using Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, set to run for 150 days until July 24, 2026. And he opened new Section 301 investigations into 16 major trading partners including China, the EU, Mexico, Japan, India, Vietnam, South Korea, and Taiwan. Meaning another wave of tariffs is already being built. What this costs you? $1,500 per household per year. Let's talk numbers. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's tariffs amount to the largest U.S. tax increase as a percentage of GDP since 1993, and they translate to an average tax increase of $1,500 per U.S. household in 2026. Not a tax on businesses, a tax on you. Because here's how tariffs actually work. The U.S. importer, the company buying the goods from abroad, pays the tariff to the government. And then they pass that cost on to you, the consumer, in the form of higher prices. The items most affected: metals and electronics, think appliances, phones, computers; vehicles, cars, trucks, parts, anything made with aluminum or steel; clothing made with synthetic fabrics from Asia. Pharmaceuticals are being targeted next. Trump has signaled tariffs on drugs could approach 200% by late 2026. Imagine what that does to the cost of your medication. The Canada-Mexico situation is particularly painful for Americans who don't realize how integrated the supply chain has become. A car built in Michigan might have parts that cross the US, Canada-Mexico border 7 times during assembly. Tariffs on those crossings add up. The auto industry has already been crying foul. Ford, GM, and Stellantis all warned that tariffs would cost them billions. And those costs flow downstream to the sticker price on your next vehicle. For small business owners, the picture is especially brutal. A company importing goods, machinery, materials, components, suddenly faces input costs that are 10 to 25% higher. Many small businesses have no pricing power to pass that along. They absorb the loss, cut staff, or close. The global reordering. What happens when everyone finds new friends? Here's the bigger story that tariffs are telling. The world is breaking into economic blocks, and the US may end up with fewer friends than it realizes. Canada and the UK, historically America's closest allies, both visited China in what were the first such prime ministerial visits in 8 years. They did this specifically because Trump's tariff threats made them realize they needed to diversify their trade relationships. The EU signed a landmark free trade deal with India in January 2026, the largest free trade zone in history, covering 2 billion people and nearly 25% of global GDP, partly driven by the need to reduce dependence on the US. Latin America's Mercosur bloc signed a deal with the EU after 25 years of negotiations. Countries that were once firmly in America's economic orbit are building alternative relationships. China, meanwhile, is using the trade war to position itself as a more reliable partner. Germany, whose largest trading partner is now China, not the US, is trying to reset relations with Beijing. When a G7 nation's biggest trading relationship is with China, that tells you something profound has shifted. The World Bank's Global Supply Chain Stress Index shows elevated shipping delays across the board, a direct result of the rerouting and uncertainty caused by the trade war. Nearly 3 in 4 business leaders say they're prioritizing resilience over efficiency, building supply chains that can handle disruption, even if they cost more. The era of ultra-efficient, just-in-time global supply chains is ending. What's replacing it costs more to run, and those costs are passed to you. The pharmaceutical bombshell and the chip war. 2 sectors deserve special attention because they affect you most directly: medicines and semiconductors. Trump has explicitly targeted pharmaceuticals. The US imports a huge proportion of its generic drugs, the ones most Americans rely on, from India, China, and other countries. A 200% tariff on drug imports would be catastrophic for American patients. Even branded drug companies have been scrambling to announce US manufacturing investments to qualify for exemptions. The UK secured a 0% pharmaceutical tariff in exchange for investment commitments. Other countries haven't been so lucky. If those tariffs hit generics, the cost of everyday medications, blood pressure drugs, diabetes medications, antidepressants, could spike dramatically. On semiconductors, Trump imposed 25% tariffs on advanced computing chips in January 2026. The US is now in the middle of major Section 232 investigations into semiconductor imports, which could trigger even higher tariffs. Taiwan is in the crosshairs of both tariff threats and geopolitical pressure. Trump pushed TSMC to commit $100 billion in US investment, essentially as protection money from tariffs. The company is building in Arizona, but even TSMC's founder privately acknowledged this costs 50% more than Taiwan and can't immediately replicate Taiwan's capabilities. The irony is brutal. The US is trying to bring chip manufacturing home, but the tariffs and trade uncertainty are making it harder for US tech companies to operate, raising the costs of the very products that are supposed to power American economic leadership in the AI era. What could actually happen next? Here's the critical question. Where does this go? Scenario 1. Deals get done. The 150-day Section 122 tariff expires in July 2026. If Trump uses that deadline to pressure trading partners into concessions and then reduces tariffs in exchange, markets stabilize, supply chains adapt, and the disruption is painful but manageable. This is the optimistic scenario. JP Morgan has it as its bull case for equity markets. Scenario 2. Escalation. New Section 301 tariffs layer on top of existing ones. Trading partners retaliate. The EU, which reached a deal last summer that's now wobbling, could reimpose counter tariffs. China, which still faces massive tariff walls, retaliates with export controls on rare earth minerals, the materials that go into batteries, electric vehicles, and advanced electronics, where China has a near monopoly. Supply chains fragment further. Inflation stays elevated. Growth slows. Stagflation, the 1970s nightmare, becomes the story of the late 2020s. Scenario 3. Legal chaos. The Supreme Court ruling has created genuine uncertainty about what legal tools the president actually has. New challenges to the Section 122 tariffs are already being filed. If those tariffs also get struck down, you have a situation where the president's entire trade policy is in legal limbo, which is arguably worse for businesses than even high tariffs, because at least with high tariffs you know what to plan for, what you need to know and do. The trade war is not abstract. It is a $1,500 per household tax you're already paying. It is higher car prices, higher drug prices, higher grocery prices. It is small businesses closing and supply chains breaking. But it is also, and this is the part that doesn't get said enough, a genuinely complicated policy experiment with real arguments on both sides. There are manufacturing jobs that need to come back to America. There are trading practices by China that were genuinely unfair. The question is whether tariffs alone, applied with this level of unpredictability, achieve those goals, or whether they just transfer wealth from consumers to the government and from global supply chains to chaos. Watch the July 24th deadline for the Section 122 tariff. Watch the Section 301 investigations. Watch the Trump-Xi summit when it finally happens. And watch your own prices, because the trade war is quietly showing up in everything you buy, every single day. Subscribe, share this with someone who thinks trade wars are just politics, because they're paying for it whether they know it or not.